Well, hey, CF students, my name is Samuel and I get to be one of the student pastors here. And we are so happy that you guys are here with us tonight. We hope you all had a great Thanksgiving and enjoy some time off school. Well, tonight we're going to talk about the power of remembering and how looking back on the past can actually help us look forward to the future more clearly. You see, there's a group of people in the Bible who had a tendency to forget where they came from. They had a tendency to forget what God had taught them and brought them through. You see, God wanted so much more for them than what they were settling for, but they had a hard time believing that for themselves. The truth is that God wants more for us too. And just as God instructed the Israelites to remember where they came from to prepare them for where they were going, we can do the same. We can learn from their stories and our own. And in Deuteronomy 8, God is reminding the Israelites of the commandments and the promise that he had given them. God had more for the Israelites. And what I know is that he has more for us. And so every student can experience more by remembering these three areas. The first area is remembering the good that God has done. You see, for over 400 years, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and God had just rescued them and promised them a new land. But the Israelites had a hard time trusting God. They had seen him work and move in power when he freed them from Egypt, but for some reason, they didn't actually believe that they could take back the land that God had promised them, even though he told them they could. And because of that, they became wanderers in the desert. They wandered for 40 years in a hot, dry desert. But you see, the beautiful thing is that God never left them. He was with them every single day, guiding their path. So remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years, humbling you and testing you to prove your character and to find out whether or not you would obey his commands. Deuteronomy 8:2. You see, God was teaching them a very powerful lesson. He was teaching them to remember his goodness and to only depend on him. Sometimes it's easy for us to forget God's goodness when we're walking through the wilderness. It's easy to look at the bad and the hard and dismiss how God has actually already provided for us. But the Israelites here are instructed a little differently. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from the rock. Deuteronomy 8:15. There is more for us to experience in the wilderness than just the bad. You and I can experience his presence and faithfulness when we choose to remember the good. The second area is remembering the lesson. The Israelites are also given a warning in this portion of text. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and to test you in order to know what was in your heart. Deuteronomy 8:2. It's kind of like when a team looks back at tapes. A football team, after a game, they'll go back and watch over and over and over again the good plays and the bad plays. So why do they do this? They do this so that they can learn from their mistakes and don't make the same mistake over and over again. When the Israelites forgot what God had taught them, they were disciplined by God. Just like it was important for the Israelites to remember what God was teaching them, it is so important for us to remember what God is teaching us. And I know it might sound intense that, God sent the Israelites into the wilderness for 40 years to teach them a lesson. But in order for the Israelites to learn that God was more powerful and wonderful than they could imagine, they needed to remember the lessons that he taught them. And number 3, we have to remember the commandments that God has given us. Because if we're not careful, there's a temptation that comes with success and these high mountaintop moments. And if we're not careful, we start to think that we're the reason that we're there. We're the reason for the good. We're the reason for our joy. And then we start to believe that we don't actually need God. And so instead of giving God praise, we give ourselves praise, when God is the only reason we are in these seasons at all. The Israelites needed this reminder in preparation for entering the promised land. Deuteronomy 8:6-7 says, "So obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and hills." The commandments that the Israelites received was protection for them because they had just been freed from slavery. And to be honest, they did not know how to live and function outside of slavery and oppression. So God gave them these parameters on how to live a full and abundant life. God has so much more for us, students, than lives that we dream up of ourselves. And so bottom line is this: when we remember the past, we can walk confidently into all that God has for us.